Well, good afternoon, everybody. We will start. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this last of the Civic and Moral Education Initiative events this year. But don't forget to come all next year as well. As you know, we've had a very lively series of conversations, presentations, activities throughout the year. And we've had this year and also last year innovated a new style of presentation, which we call dialogue. So we bring people together who have, in this case, only somewhat different views, with the intention of creating a provocative, I've actually really got really different views, provocative discussions on important issues. This has been very successful. And so we're going to have a dialogue today on one of those areas which is really extraordinarily important and also very cutting edge. And of course raises a huge number of ethical questions, political questions, technological questions, demographic questions, etc. So I find it extraordinarily interesting. Every time I open anybody's journal articles or books, I find another provocative issue to think about in the area of civics. So I'm delighted to have today these distinguished people who come and talk about it. So we have three speakers and we have a commentator. So let me introduce our panel. Incidentally, most of you haven't been to a CMEI event before. Please do sign the sheet so that we know who you are. And if you haven't been before, we can put you onto our mailing list for future events. Okay, well, we have, in no particular order, Carrie James, wave your hand in the air. So, Carrie is the principal investigator at Project Zero, and she's also lecturer in education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Her research explores young people's digital, moral and civic lives. With Howard Gardner, Carrie has co-directed the Good Play Project, a research and education initiative focused on youth ethics and the new digital media. And the Good Participation Project, a study of how youth do civics in the digital age. Carrie is also co-principal investigator on the Out of Eden Project, which is a fascinating project, if you don't know about it. It's an educational companion to the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Paul Salovek, called Out of Eden. It's a walk, basically, an international walk. I think it's going to take 7 years. Am I right, 7 years?
It's going to be about 9.
9?
He's slower than expected.
He's slower than expected. It's slow journalism. And Carrie's publications include Disconnected Youth, New Media, and The Ethics Gap, which was published in 2014. Carrie has an MA and PhD in sociology from New York University. Next on the list is Sangeeta Shrestha. And Sangeeta, hand up.
Hello.
Is in LA, and she is director of the MacArthur-funded Henry Jenkins Media Activism and Participatory Politics, or MAP, project based at the University of Southern California. This focuses on civic participation in the digital age and includes research, educator outreach, and partnerships with community groups and media organizations. And it also and companies also. Sangeeta's own scholarly work focuses on the intersections among popular culture, performance, new media, politics, and globalization. She holds a PhD from UCLA and also an MSc degrees from MIT and the London School of Economics. Her book on Bollywood dance and globalization, Is It All About Hips?, was published by Sage in 2011. I look forward to looking at that. Do you do the dancing yourself, Sangeeta?
I do. Less nowadays.
Less nowadays, yes. But unfortunately,
We can still, I mean, if we run out, if we have time. Always ready.
Did we get an answer to the question? Is it all about hips?
in the discussion you could answer the question, yes. Her more recent research has focused on issues storytelling and surveillance among American Muslim youth, and the achievements and challenges faced by invisible children pre and post Corey 2012. She's also one of the authors of By Any Media Necessary, the new activism of youth, which is coming out almost now. I think it's out, isn't it?
Yeah, the ink is dry.
The ink is dry. So we're delighted to have Sangeeta. And again, what the thing about this panel is they're so broad in their interests. They integrate so much from so many different areas of culture, the academy, media, and so on, which is very exciting. Then we have Ethan Zuckerman, who is Director of the Center for Civic Media at MIT, and he's Principal Research Scientist at MIT's Media Lab. He's the author of Rewire, Digital Cosmopolitanism in the Age of Connection, published in 2013, with Rebecca McKinnon. Rebecca McKinnon. Ethan co-founded international blogging community Global Voices.
Tell her about I'm Fixing It. Please go ahead.
Of course, yes. This is a media event after all. Ethan's research focuses on issues of informal freedom, civic engagement through digital tools, and international connections through media. He blogs at, I can't read his blog out, but I'm sure you'll tell you what it is. And he lives in the Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts, which is a very nice place to live. I've driven through it. Finally, Ashley Lee is our commentator. Ashley is a doctoral student at HGSE, where she studies the internet and youth civic and political participation, applying qualitative and computational methods, so she's a multimedia person. She designs and studies digitally reworked participatory spaces for youth, which is also one of the early career programming scholars. So we have an absolutely stellar panel, and also a panel full of very provocative and exciting ideas. So I'm delighted to welcome you all, and I look forward to an extremely lively debate. So Ethan is going to speak first, I think. No,
Carrie. Carrie speak first, I believe.
Carrie's speaking first.
We're fighting over who's going to talk.
No, you're talking.
Yeah, can everyone hear me? Is my mic working? Okay, great. So, thanks Helen for that great introduction, very rich with all of our biographical details. It's great to be on this panel with Sangeeta, Ashley, and Ethan. I've kind of worked with all of them to varying degrees. So what I thought I would do is start out by laying a bit of the context for some of the research that we've done in relation to this big problem space of how social media is being used for civics. And to varying extents, Ethan, all of us actually up here have been part of a research network called the Youth and Participatory Politics Research Network, funded by the MacArthur Foundation. We've been doing our work for, 5 or 6 years now. A group of researchers, educational practitioners, a fabulously interdisciplinary group, has been studying the question of how social media is changing the face of youth civic participation. So how are social media being used as levers by young people for activism? And so in various ways we've been involved in this network. It's been terrific to work with one another. I think it's helpful to start out with the network's conception of participatory politics. What do we mean by this term? And I decided to put it on a slide because it's pretty rich. So the network has defined participatory politics as interactive, peer-based acts through which individuals and groups seek to exert both voice and influence on issues of public concern. So there's a lot in there, and I want to just call attention to a couple of key terms and words. First is interactive, because we're very interested in digital media and how digital contexts are supporting civic participation. Peer-based, and sort of what's behind that, we often talk about participatory politics as independent of elite institutions. So young people today don't need to be of voting age to participate in political life. They can have a Twitter account or a Facebook account. They can be a part of the public sphere at younger ages. Peer-based acts through which both individuals and groups can exert both voice and influence. So voice, express their ideas, but ideally voice leads to influence, some sort of change out there in the world related to issues of public concern. So this definition of participatory politics I think, is made a little bit more concrete by the set of core civic practices that the network has been talking about over the years of our work and studying. So practices like, how do young people investigate public issues using the internet and digital tools? How can they produce an artifact that has a political message and share it in the network public? How can they circulate, and how are they circulating ideas that have a political tint to them? To what extent are they engaging in dialogue about public issues and giving feedback to power holders? And to what extent are they using tools like change.org and other aspects of digital and social media to mobilize individuals to act on behalf of the cause? So I hope that gives you a sense of, more concretely, the kinds of practices that we've been looking at and that we consider to be a part of participatory politics. Now, these practices have been, in existence in political life for eons, but we argue that digital media give them an edge. It's easier to, it's not easy, but it's easier to reach a broad public using the internet in some way. So I think that with that framing in mind, what I'd like to do is say a couple of things about how our specific research group at Project Zero has played a role in this network. So with colleagues including Howard Gardner, as Helen mentioned, also Emily Weinstein, a fantastic doctoral student here at the Ed School who works with Bob Selman, Ashley Lee, another doctoral student who's doing terrific work, Daniel Gruner, a special visiting student in the back row, who's a doctoral student who works with Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who does work on flow and creativity. He's here for the year working with our group. And Margaret Mullen, who's been a longtime researcher with us on these projects. So our team, and actually we've had other folks over the years, but that's our sort of the current set of individuals who've been involved in this work. We've been exploring two distinct elements of participatory politics and how you participate. They care about civic issues. How do they take up the opportunities to talk about and to share their political selves online? So what does online civic expression look like if you're a young person who's involved in and cares about public issues? So that's sort of the voice side. You use your civic voice on social media. And we're also interested in dialogue. Specifically, once you get out there and you are a political actor on social media, to what extent do you get into the fray, get into exchange with others, and talk about issues and become perhaps more informed, get into conflicts and disagreements. So those are two broad areas that our group has been particularly interested in. And so I just want to share a couple of headlines about each one. So in our first set of, we do qualitative interviews. We talked with 70 young people who were involved in civic activities, but using digital and social media to varying extents as part of their activism. And we were really interested in this question of they're doing things in their lives in general. To what extent are they displaying their politics in network publics? And we found that that even though they were committed activists, there was a variation in the degree to which they were comfortable being political on social media. And so this is sort of interesting. I mean, there is this argument that some people make about slacktivism, that doing things online is easy, that it's easy to express your views online or engage in other participatory acts, and that amounts to slacktivism. However, the young people we spoke with actually had the feeling that being political online was pretty risky. And it was risky in two ways. Number one, many of them talked about risks associated with having a political digital footprint. That in the future, down the road, or even at present, somebody who could exert consequences on their life could find. So, the impact that a future employer, or even they mentioned college admissions officers, finding their political digital trails, and that being political online would pose a risk. Now, whether this perception of this risk was real or not, this was a reality that these activists were thinking about. The second area of concern was about getting into a conflict with someone and really managing disagreements, managing a disagreement over a political issue, and not feeling like they had the tools to manage a situation like that. Now, we found in doing a little bit of longitudinal work in relation to those concerns that these concerns led some civic actors to go quiet online over a 2-year period. This was the work that Emily Weinstein was really centrally involved in working with us on. So that led us to do a more recent set of interviews with young people who are activists, but also very committed to using social media, not afraid to be political online. So we wanted to know how are they handling these areas of concern that came up in our prior study. And we were particularly interested in what we called civic dialoguers, young people who were willing to get into the discussions with individuals about political issues online. And we found some interesting things among these young people. Number one is that they have a variety of moves and tactics, a variety of dialogical strategies for starting political conversations online. They're actually pretty savvy and often quite confident in deploying different moves. They use questioning, storytelling, efforts to disrupt people's day by posting something provocative on a social media site. So they have a range of tools and strategies, and we went through data meticulously and found, probably 40 or 50 different kinds of things they were doing. Would that be right? I mean, maybe it's closer to 30. I'm looking at my colleagues, quite a diverse array of moves and tactics. So they're very savvy, yet at the same time, they manage a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, especially when confronting disagreements or conflict about political issues online. In fact, when they're faced with a disagreement, their number one strategy is to withdraw. Even though they have this diverse toolkit of different things that they could do to navigate political conversations, if they confronted with an outright disagreement, the number one strategy is to withdraw. So this is concerning, interesting, something that we, as people interested in education are sort of scratching our heads about. The other part of the story is that these young people had very few supports for their digital civic action. So they have savvy moves and tactics, yet they face a lot of anxiety, and they have very few sources of support. In fact, most of their learning about how to do civics in social media environments is quite self-directed, either observing others or having direct experiences where things go really badly and decide to do things differently the next time. So this, for us, suggests a really important need to think differently about civic education, and for educators to be thinking about helping to support youth to use the variety of tools that they may already have at their disposal or could be introduced to navigate disagreements online in particular, because we know that exposure to engagement with diverse views is a really important part of being effective and reflective civic actors. So I will end there and turn it over to Ethan.
Indeed, and you're going to have to turn the clicker over to me too. I'm not smart enough to be able to give a talk without slides, so I'm going to have to resort instead. But look, this ordering is going to prove to be very helpful in some ways, because Carrie's talking about people trying to figure out how to be civically active online, the anxieties they have about it, the changing nature of being active in the space, and the ways in which thinking about participatory politics has really forced us to sort of broaden and expand our definitions of what political, or what I would perhaps say civic participation looks like. So I want to talk a little bit about what this can look like on the ground. And the ground in this case is Accra, Ghana, which is sort of my second city. It's where I did a lot of my research and sort of growing up in my career. And it's a city that I return to all the time, and I have good friends there. And I was hanging out with some bloggers there in September, and I was particularly excited about meeting this gentleman in the red cap, whose name is Efo Dela. And the reason that I wanted to meet Efo was that he's got something like 14,000 Twitter followers and about 25,000 Facebook followers, and he is enormously active in a movement in Ghana right now called Dumsor Must Stop. And I'm going to assume that most of you don't speak Twi, so I'm going to translate for you. Dumsor means on, off. And it specifically refers to the fact that if you live in Accra right now, the power keeps going on and off. And Accra is basically, imagine the worst day of a Boston summer and then just stretch it out all year long. It's basically 35 centigrade and like 99% humidity all the time. And Ghana is now a middle-income nation, which means that everybody lives in air-conditioned apartments, which are not air-conditioned when the power goes off. So people are really ticked off about Dumsor, and it's basically a way of arguing the government can't get their act together. This is one issue that whatever party you're in, we can agree on. We've got to do something about this. And the activists behind this are actually pretty sophisticated. You can see these Ghanaian young people. They have T-shirts with hashtag Dumsor Must Stop. They've got their wonderful visual, which are the kerosene lanterns, which they have to use to study by when the power goes down. Now, trust me, these people are well enough off. They're actually sleeping in their air-conditioned cars when they can't get power within their, but it's a good visual, the whole idea behind, the kerosene lamp. So I'm talking to Efo about this. I'm trying to be a good anthropologist, and I say, Efo, when you are mobilizing people in Ghana, when you're trying to bring people out to march, like these 5,000 people who march from the outskirts of town down into Black Star Square, what's the best social media tool in Ghana for political mobilization? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it WhatsApp? And Efo looks at me and says, whoa, man, I'm not political. And I go, wait a second. You are one of the organizers of 5,000 people who've gone out in the streets to march through the center of town to protest that the government can't provide you with electricity, and you're not political? And so there's a lot of countries that I work in, when someone says, I'm not political, what they mean is, shut up, I don't want to talk about this, don't get me arrested. But that's not Ghana. Ghana is an open society. It's actually got, probably by many democratic measures, a more open society than the United States. The reason Efo is not political is that he feels like if you're political in Ghana right now, you are an idiot. You are so dumb to think that change could happen through politics that if you are that dumb, not only does he not want to talk to you, he won't be photographed with you. If you are associated with the NDC or the NPP, the two almost interchangeable parties that dominate Ghanaian politics, he won't take a selfie with you, because he is worried that he will be seen as being polluted by this professional activity of politics, which he believes has absolutely nothing to do with the actual civic governance of the country. Now, I'm telling you Efo's story because I bump into this a lot. And I don't just see this in Ghana. I'm starting to see this in some other nations as well, where a lot of people who find themselves involved with civics are not particularly interested in being involved with politics, to the point where you can have the farcical nature of a political campaign where two people stand up, one of whom has been in elected office for more than 20 years, and tell you that they are from outside of politics, because outside of politics is the only place to be from. And so I think what's going on here is that we are at a moment of incredibly high mistrust in institutions. And one of the things you heard Carrie talk about is that this notion that participatory politics may be outside the realm of traditional institutions. And there's a good reason for that. Institutions across the board, in the US, in most of Europe, in many, many other democracies, our confidence in those institutions has fallen sharply. In that graph over there, you can see the decay of people answering the question, do you believe the government will do the right thing all or most of the time, from a peak of 77% in 1964 to recent lows of about 11%. And it's not just confidence in the federal government. In Washington, you can actually see a slide in confidence in most major institutions, including banks, religion, and, God help us all, the university. If it is too big to have a human face, many, many, many people are now having a hard time trusting and relating to it. This is a huge problem for civics. If you do not believe that the government is particularly powerful for making change, It is very hard to talk to young people with a straight face and say, it is incumbent upon you that you make it out and do your patriotic duty and go and vote. Because their response is, why the hell would I vote? Particularly in a midterm election. Why the hell would I elect a Congress critter who's going to end up somewhere in this institution that's capable of doing nothing because it's completely paralyzed? Why does that have anything to do with me except for some generalized sense of civic duty? So then you go, okay, fair enough, let's not vote. We'll just go out and protest. To who? This is an image from the March on Washington. One of the critical things about the March on Washington is that it was on Washington. It was designed to persuade an executive who had at that point recalcitrant Congress to try to take action around civil rights. But if you're in a position where you have extremely low confidence in the presidency and extremely low confidence in your legislative branch, even many forms of protest start looking very, very difficult as a way to make change. My favorite terms of diagnosis for this come from this guy, Chris Hayes, who I have to say is remarkably smart for a man who spends his time on television. He wrote a book that I would say the first 2 chapters of are killer. You can skip after that. But the first chapter introduces these 2 ideas, the notion of the institutionalist and the insurrectionist. Institutionalists believe that the way that we're going to make change is by people of intelligence and goodwill coming into the institutions that currently govern our society, reforming them, making them stronger, making them better, and trying to figure out how they move forward in the future. Insurrectionists basically believe that's bullshit. And they feel like they're either going to have change outside of those institutions, or they're going to have to replace those institutions with either some new institutions or something else entirely. And the problem with insurrectionists is that it's real hard to get them pinned down on what it is that they would like to do. So, in setting up an artificial dichotomy, because Carrie and I like each other very, very much, I'm going to argue that a lot of what YPP is doing is looking at institutionalist responses to this moment in civics. How do we get students to figure out how to engage with these sort of institutions and sort of make change with them? A lot of my work right now is to try to figure out, can we do effective insurrections? And so here's the set of tools that I like to use for effective insurrectionism. This is a rhetorical move that I like to call the inverted Lessig. It starts with Larry Lessig's idea of 4 forces that regulate society. In Code 1999, Lessig basically says if you want to think about how we control our societies, we do 4 basic things. We make things legal or illegal. We can make things expensive or cheap through markets. Anyone a smoker? 12 bucks a pack? That'll really stop you smoking pretty quickly over time. You can make changes through code and other architectures. You can make it easy and hard to do things technically. And you can try to go after norms. You can essentially say, let's make something socially desirable or socially sanctioned. In the inverted Lessig, we turn this inside out. And we basically say all of these become pathways and tools to change. And if you are an insurrectionist, you, generally speaking, are skeptical of our ability to make change through law at the moment. So, enough respect to people who are making change through law, right? Human Rights Campaign, amazing that we've gotten victories on gay marriage through the court, wonderful way to do it. The fact that we know the name of this crazy court clerk somewhere in Kentucky basically shows you how effective this is as a force for change, because that's the only person who hasn't been willing to make this change. But for a lot of people who feel like we can't make that change, there are some other options. NSA surveillance. I'm pretty pissed off about NSA surveillance, and I'm pretty bummed out that at a moment when we have an allegedly progressive president, we're not able to really protect our communications with non-US persons. But I don't actually expect that a Hillary Clinton administration, or God forbid a Donald Trump administration, is going to do much on this. So I have a lot of faith in the guys behind Tor. And I have a lot of faith behind all the people working on different encryption systems to try to make it significantly harder for any government, including my own, to spy on my communications. And that is a form of activism and change through code. Now, it's not open to everybody, but it is open to a set of people, and it's a way of making change that's actually quite different than other moments in the past. Would have been really nice in the last 80 years if we'd gotten carbon markets in the United States. might have hoped for it. At the moment, I have a lot of hope in that a guy like Elon Musk is suddenly able to introduce an electric vehicle to the market that sells 200,000 the first day that it's on the market, and might actually help us make meaningful impacts on climate change using market-based forces rather than using regulatory forces. But the place where I tend to spend a lot of my attention is around this idea of norms-based change. And probably the best way to think about norms-based change is the Black Lives Matter movement. Because the issues that Black Lives Matter are bringing up, the issues of unarmed civilians being killed by police, are not issues that you're going to fix through law. It's been illegal to kill unarmed people in the course of carrying out your policing duties for a while now. But that isn't actually changing what appears to be an epidemic of violence, because what's really wrong is a norms-based problem. And the norms-based problem is that we have ended up with a social norm of black maleness as being dangerous and therefore suspect and therefore reacted to with violence. And if you're going to go after that, you actually have to change social values over time. So, this image over here, this gentleman standing in the red shirt, that's Michael Brown. And most of us saw that image for the first time the day that Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, because the press went onto his Facebook page, they looked for images of Michael Brown, they grabbed that image and they put it up on stories about the young man who had been killed by the police. And if we had more time, I would do the call and response in this to get you to describe the image, and you would at some point admit that he looks scary, he looks threatening, he's being photographed from the ground, and that makes him look taller than he actually is. He's throwing a sign that happens to be a peace sign. People often identify it as a gang sign. He is clearly posturing himself to be a badass young man, which is, by the way, not uncommon for 18-year-old men to do. That other photo right next to him is also Michael Brown. It's from the same year. It's also from the same Facebook feed. And if you look at that one, he does not look particularly threatening. He looks like a kid whose cheeks you want to pinch. He's a kid, and that's the point. He's an 18-year-old kid. But when the media ran stories about Michael Brown, they used the photo in the red t-shirt, not the photo with him in the varsity jacket. And people online started asking the question, if they gunned me down, what photo would they use? And people started putting up pairs of images, essentially saying, hey, these photos are both on my Facebook feed, they're both public. If I got gunned down on the street by the police, do you think they'd show me as an active duty Marine, or do you think they'd show me flipping off the camera? And the answer, of course, is built into the question. This went all over the place. People jumped on it. People started putting pairs of their own photos from Facebook. Wonderfully, you know things go viral when white teenagers don't get it. And so it became very, very popular for white teens to start showing photos of themselves drunk versus in their graduation gear. Then you had people on Tumblr saying, white people, please stay out of this hashtag, essentially saying this is meant to be political. 3 days later, this is on the front page of the New York Times. Very hard to find that first photo of Michael Brown. Once the New York Times basically says, hey, guys, we were showing a racial bias. We all did it. It's clear that we were wrong. We got called out. You actually saw quite a bit of change on this. Is this going to end police violence on black men? No, but it's a step towards that sort of norms-based change, and it's an example of how people are learning to do civics using these other tools and using these other levers. So here's what I'm interested in right now. I want to think about how do we teach civics to people who are not going to be persuaded back into institutionalism. They are not going to be swayed that at some point they're going to figure out how to grow up and be serious and make change through the polls. They're going to try to make change through whatever way they feel is most effective. And I want to think about how do we evaluate their efficacy, how do we think about that efficacy, how do we figure out if they're on the right track or not. And I just want to close with this story because for me, this is an example of how tough and sort of how elegant in some ways these fields can be. When the Human Rights Campaign urged people to start changing their icons on Facebook to the pink equal sign on the red background, this was a great example of slacktivism. Some people thought, you started seeing memes like this before we make a ruling that enough people change their Facebook profile picture. So this is a classic misunderstanding of a civic tactic. This basically says, here's a symbolic action, and let's take it seriously as an instrumental action. let's assume that if we change enough Facebook pictures, then the Supreme Court will change their decision. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But if we back out and sort of say, actually, what's really going on here is that for about a week, there was a very good chance that some, maybe most, of your friends on Facebook were going to show themselves as allies in support of equal marriage. And it's this interesting moment of opinion synchronization where you suddenly go, oh, maybe I'm in the minority on this. Or, oh, I guess it's okay for me to stand up and say how I feel about this. This sort of fear that Carrie was talking about, this is an interesting way of breaking that fear and getting people to sort of put forward their voice. And so when we start talking about teaching civics this way, there's new concepts we have to bring onto the table. And the last one that I'm going to bring on, and then I'm going to shut up, is this idea of thick and thin. We mostly ask people to engage in thick civics. We want them to go lead a movement, we want them to go learn everything about it, we want them to start an organization, lead a campaign, and that is a lot to ask of people. And most people are not ready to get involved with thick activism, in fashion or not. At the very least, they're going to get drawn in by thin activism. And thin activism doesn't ask for your head, it really just asks for your feet. It just asks for you to show up. And we tend to really denigrate this form of activism. We tend to call it slacktivism. We tend to say there's not much there. But the truth is there are certain types of civic participation that we want to be thin. When voting requires thick effort, we call it vote suppression, right? You should just be able to show up and vote, right? I mean, some things have to be thin. They have to work at scale. And a technique like this doesn't stand up to thick scrutiny, right? The only person who really did thinking about this was someone at the Human Rights Campaign. Everybody else either changed their profile or made a cute profile out of 2 strips of bacon. It's a pretty thin action, but when you get 3 million people to do it, it's capable of doing things on different levels. So, big takeaways for me. I am not persuaded that we are going to convince people in high school right now to become civic activists through existing institutions. What I do think we can do is greatly broaden the set of what we consider to be civic or maybe political action. Take it seriously, learn the levers it's trying to move, learn the techniques it's trying to use, and then we can start thinking about how we build a civics career.
I don't know if I'll leave that.
All you have to do is click into it.
One click.
Well, but you're going to want to trigger it at some point.
That's right. So I guess I'm kind of
Trigger
left to, yes, but something's going to happen at the end of my presentation. I guess I'm kind of left to artificially bridge the artificial divide.
That's all that much because we follow each other's work.
Yes. So actually, as Ethan was speaking, I was reminded of a panel that we organized very early in the work that I do with Henry Jenkins, actually at MIT, where we brought together, at that time, youth that were going to be part of the research we were going to do. And the panel was titled From Cultural Participation to Political Participation. And I hadn't met all the activists, so I was moderating it, so I met with them prior, very much like we did here, and just sort of say, okay, here are going to be some key questions. And they all arrived. It was a young libertarian, somebody from the Harry Potter Alliance, and a young American Muslim activist. And they all said, I'm not here. I don't do politics. Like all of them, they're like, and this became their discussion. At some point, I had to, this is prior to the panel, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, just stop talking about this. This is going to be the first question when we get up onto the panel. And when we got up onto the panel, I asked this question, and they again said the same thing. And this Twitter thing emerged from the audience, where they're like, "What do you mean you're not political?" You know, it's called Giving a Shit, which is actually the title of our last chapter in the book. Now, you are doing political work, and it became this big thing about where the youth were really distancing themselves from the term politics, and they were defining what they do, which I saw as political, as not being political. So with that, I'll enter into, so I feel like even though we were coming at it from the participatory politics angle in terms of bridging, what we were arriving at is something very much what you're talking about. So the work I do with Henry Jenkins, based at USC, really took on getting into exemplar case studies of youth who were doing very much what Ethan was describing, and maybe at sometimes bridging into formal political realms, but other times are affecting change in other ways. So what we did very much working actually with Carrie initially to synchronize our research methods, is that we did an in-depth qualitative ethnographic dive into specific communities. And we spent a lot of time defining what those communities would be and how they could relate to each other. Where we landed was a case study on the Harry Potter Alliance and Nerdfighters. Harry Potter Alliance is a 501c3 which takes the narratives of Harry Potter and harnesses them towards real world change. So the example I always go to is the enslavement of the house elves and thinking about child labor today. So they would actually build a campaign around that, where they're very much in relation to Henry's earlier work, they're leveraging your love for Harry Potter to helping you think about real world change, right? So you may not really be so interested in real world change, but you really care about Harry Potter, and they're saying, look, Harry Potter actually relates to your life. So you can take action very much like Harry Potter did in the story, or in this case, Hermione. The second case study that we did was on invisible children, Pony 2012. Happened where we actually started our work on invisible children before, when they were just a San Diego-based group where 3 filmmakers had gone to Uganda and made a film, and were able to mobilize largely initially evangelical base of supporters, youth supporters, towards channeling funds and other support to Uganda to capture Joseph Kony. Actually, Ethan's done amazing work on this and looking at it from the international angle. What we did is really look at the organization itself. So why were they so effective in building this youth movement in the United States, and how did that work? So we actually saw them through the peak of Pony 2012. We were in conversation with them as that happened. We witnessed Jason Russell's breakdown, and then eventually we got to witness the dissolution of the organization as an outcome of that. So when I actually just spoke to somebody from Invisible Children last week, she was like, you know what, like, I'm really glad I went through that. Pony 2012 was the worst thing that happened to us as an organization. I'm really glad I learned. She's like, it changed my worldview forever. That was not a successful campaign from the perspective of IC. Then the third case study was on American Muslim youth networks, where we looked at the ways in which young American Muslims were mobilizing around their identity in a post 9/11 climate in the United States. That case study just keeps going, especially with Donald Trump now. It's just this case study that just never seems to end. But what we found was a real precarious balance that these youth were balancing between feeling silenced by surveillance both within their communities, also from the Islamic State now, where you actually see a hit list come out on progressive Muslims around the world, but also by surveillance that they felt could be leveraged against them by the U.S. government if they were too controversial or questioned things around the United States too much. And the final case study, the next case study was on young youth who mobilized around the immigration rights movement. At that time, they called themselves Dreamers. And we looked at the ways in which their expressive practices coming out as undocumented helped solidify the movement, but also then we argue actually helped it gain visibility and eventually transition into some change, or at least a shift in the public and the norms perhaps around immigration and their legal status. And the final case study was on young libertarian youth and their fandom of theorists of libertarianism. So we took a deep look into how they were expressing their political views, but also they're relating again to sort of bridging. A lot of them express themselves as categorical non-voters. They do not vote. They see themselves as politically active. They would actually identify with that, but they do not see the outcome of their political engagement as voting, because they see that's a waste of time. That's not interesting in terms of affecting social change. So what we did with those case studies is that we took a deeper look we cross-analyzed them, and we arrived at some key learnings that are by the book. It'll be available for free online in a couple of weeks, but if you do not do that, I'll just give you the 5 bullet points of the book. One is that the youth we saw were working through any media necessary. And here you inverted Elisic, we inverted this idea of technological determinism, where we actually did not see that it was all about Facebook or Twitter. It was about thinking about what your message is about, thinking about what you want to achieve, and going with any media necessary. This does not mean that there aren't challenges to participation, that there aren't inequalities, there certainly are, but we found that the youth were really smart about thinking about that, or they wanted to be smart about thinking about that they really were thinking about the story, the kind of change they wanted to affect. We also found that the language of politics really is very different for these youth. In fact, they don't see it as politics, right? So they're borrowing from pop culture, they're borrowing from music, from different genres, and they're thinking about it that way. What we also found was the rise of a focus on civic imagination. So it could be seen as escapism, but we also saw it as this idea of thinking about what you can imagine as an alternative. Whether it was looking to Harry Potter, or it was looking to the stories of Superman, or it was looking at myths that exist, but it was really about this idea that you really cannot change the world if you cannot imagine what that other world will look like. And that a lot of the youth were very much engaging in that kind of visioning to help them think about a movement that they would build. And last we found, we also found that there was a lot of crossover between friendship and interest-driven networks. This is here I'm borrowing from maybe Ida and her team, where it wasn't clear where friendship began and ended, and their political engagement and with their colleagues ended and began. And at sometimes that actually led to the phobia of contention, because it was, you didn't want to disagree with your friends on political issues in specific places. And finally, we just confirmed other findings that there are no digital natives. It's not like young people know how to do this. And a colleague of mine is actually working with a term called mobilizing structures, where she looks at participatory moments where there might be no formal organization, but there are still mechanisms for passing information. Or at times these mechanisms actually fail, right? So those ideas that we actually need those kinds of structures to affect change. So what we've been doing with that is, more recently, we've been thinking about bridging exactly between that. So if we're seeing these really interesting instances of what we would call participatory politics outside of school contexts that do not lead to participation in formal political realms, then what are we going to do in educational settings? What does that mean for more formal civic education? And what we've actually done, before I move into the final issue, I actually want to kind of bring to life where we're at, where I was describing the kind of civic action. And I'm going to play this video put out by Jack Bird from the Harry Potter Alliance. When we first met Jack, he was Lauren, and through the course, and he was in charge of their media making, so he was very much in charge of the campaigns that the Harry Potter Alliance was putting out. Through the course of knowing him, he decided to come out, which is this video, but it really also shows you how he is thinking about what change means and what his role in that kind of change is. So any clicker, I guess, should play it.
Yeah, just a minute.
When you're a spokesperson and a video creator, you are confronted with how you look and how people perceive you on a daily basis. I'm still being labeled and treated in ways that don't conform to how I actually feel inside. Ellen Page said when she came out, "I'm tired of lying by omission," and that's how I feel. There have been a lot of other things I've had to keep quiet by virtue of not being open about this. Not anything big, but just the constant second guessing and fear and this running track in the back of my mind of making sure that people don't find out, but also not really wanting to lie about things, and I'm sick of that. I just want to be me all the time without having to think about everything. So, with all of that said, I am transgender. Yep. Okay. Set it on the internet now. So, that's that. Yeah, put that smoke back in the jar. Cool. Break open the gummy bears now. This is the hard part. Now I'm hungry. Everyone's gonna stop watching now anyways. For anyone who's not familiar with exactly what that means, it's basically everything I just said before. I have always had an innate sense that I'm a guy. From my very earliest memories, I looked at men in TV shows and movies and the world around me and thought that I would grow up to look like them. I even used to imagine how I would style my beard when I grew up. I always identified with boy characters in books. And until puberty, I never even gave any of that a second thought. It just was what it was. I've tried dealing with this in a lot of different ways. Presenting in different ways, compromising, like I can be a tomboy but I have to wear girl clothes, or I can wear men's clothes but only if I have long hair. I have desperately tried to force it away. but it never goes away. It always comes back, and it always comes back stronger, and it's disturbing my life to the point that I've put off doing things. I've avoided things I used to love. I've stopped planning my future because I can't do or even envision myself doing those things while being perceived by the rest of the world to be someone that I'm not. So I have started transitioning. Moving forward, you can call me Jackson or Jack. That's one of the names my mom had picked out for me if I'd been male assigned at birth. My pronouns are he, him, his. Please do not ever call me ma'am or lump me in as one of the ladies. I am not a woman and especially not a lady. I know that all of this can take some time to adjust to, especially if you know me in real life. I will be patient, I promise, even though I will point out that I have been being patient for 25 years. And if you are someone who knows me in the meat world and are thinking I maybe should have told you one-on-one instead of through this video, I'm sorry. Believe it or not, coming out is kind of hard. And I wanted to cut down on how many times I had to do it by just making this video and pulling off the Band-Aid in one go. And honestly, this is such a personal thing, and I am not a personal sharing type of person, that I wish I didn't have to share it. But as I go through transition, people will notice, and I would like people to refer to me and perceive me in the right way, so I have to share it. But to make it feel a little less like an obligation that I can't escape, I've been reminding myself of how important it is for people to share their stories and experiences. And it's important to me that I'm honest, because I have to acknowledge that I weirdly have kind of a slight platform right now, and to not use that is selfish to me. Because when I was growing up, I didn't have any trans people in my life. There was no information available to me. There was no one like me on TV. The few examples I saw of anything were sensational headlines and crude one-off jokes, characters that were heavily stereotyped and existed only as pathetic punchlines. That representation told me that I was a freak, a mutant, and that I should do everything I could to hide how I felt, or else I'd be at best never taken seriously, and at worst locked up somewhere or even murdered. There was no positivity. There was no example of nuance or complexity. There was no basic education. I went to college believing that the terms sex and gender were synonymous, that bisexuality wasn't real, and I had never even heard of non-binary genders. That lack of information and poor media representation had a horrific and long-lasting effect on me. So I've decided to be open about who I am, because if even one person can see themselves in me, or get a bit more comfort and understanding in their own identity, or just feel less alone, then it's worth it. Because I didn't have that for a long time, and I'm not going to continue to be part of the problem.
Ooh, yeah.
Yes. So the interesting piece of that, when we interviewed Jack about his civic experiences growing up, he felt that he did not receive any support in school. He did not see himself as a civically engaged youth. He still does not see himself as a political actor. So this was kind of the question we asked contributors to a special issue of the Journal of Digital Media and Learning that's coming out in a month. And we asked them to really think about, well, what does it look like? What do you think about voice, this kind of expressive mechanisms and availabilities that we now have, and influence? What is influence? How do we define it? And here we're borrowing from our colleagues from YPP. Daniel Ellen has a wonderful book out with Jennifer Light around, that's actually titled Voice to Influence. So we got answers that really made us think. We got answers that really looked at specific case studies that have been successful, that really take a specific skill like dialogue and try to harness it and really drill into specific practices in online spaces. But we also got challenges back around the ways in which civic education, and I guess education more broadly, defines success. What does it mean? Does it mean that you get a job? Does it mean that you are able to perform a particular skill well? Is there an entrepreneurial element to it? Is it the process that counts? And more importantly, what counts as civic engagement? Does what Jack did here in this video, does that count as civic engagement? It looks very different from traditional civic ed. So I guess I'll end there with that provocation, because we're wondering where we go now. How do we actually move forward with that?
Ashley, thank you. So that was a lot of rich ideas. I initially shared an initial set of 3 questions with all of the panelists, but after all these other things that you brought up, I'm going to add some more. So I guess my initial question has to do with the question of impact, which many of you have brought up. So with this broadening definition of participation and also this phenomenon that Ethan noticed of young people not identifying with this political identity, not seeing themselves as engaging in politics even or civics when we are sort of adults, educators, researchers are used to sort of seeing them as politics. So how do we, in light of this transformation in how young people are perceiving themselves when they're engaging in these activities, like how do we redefine impact and influence, and how do we think about helping young people achieve influence in the civics realm? So that's sort of the question that Sangeeta also raised. And the other question I had was regarding the phenomenon of disagreements and conflicts that Carrie brought up. So the sort of the paradox of our digital times is that never did we have at our fingertips more powerful tools to connect with other people, but we are in so many ways also disconnected, divided, polarized politically, and there are possibilities, endless possibilities of getting trapped in our own echo chambers inside our filter bubbles. So, to what extent do we see this connection that the internet promises actually happening? So the democracy sort of thrives on different ideas, different perspectives, but and how do we prepare young people to sort of engage with different perspectives and different discourses that are not in their realm of the familiar? So how do we support that? And the other question I have is sort of the idea of having sort of a digital commons where people can come together to voice their ideas and work towards some sort of common goals to address issues of public concern. So, and the question I have is, who is actually in this common, and who are the people who are not participating in the common? Whose voices are there? Whose voices are not there? Who are included in this commons, and who are not included? So, the internet promises to sort of one of the biggest potentials of the internet is sort of to help people, to allow people who didn't previously have voices in the civil realm to have a chance to voice their concerns, opinions, and take action. And so making sort of the invisible populations visible, right? So youth, for example, who have been previously not heard in the civic realm now have opportunities to hear. But the internet can just as easily obscure groups, silence people, and Carrie had mentioned sort of the silencing phenomenon among youth groups. Also keep things hidden. And the question I want to throw out is digital democracy sort of a level playing field? Or do we need to create special structures and opportunities for people who we are not hearing from, who are silenced, who remain silenced, and who sort of back up from participating? So, so there are new unprecedented freedoms online, but also unprecedented restrictions to participating. So various forms of surveillance that sort of brought up, censorship, sort of self-censorship, digital footprints that Karen talked about, and how do we support young people in their civic endeavors? And finally, I want to sort of returning to the idea of the internet as a connector. So a lot of people are sort of engaged with ideas, people, and issues locally and also globally. So, given that the world is so interconnected and interdependent, we're seeing a lot of civic and other public issues of concern to young people that are not just local anymore. So how does the local intersect with the global in the online realm? And how are young people sort of negotiating and taking advantage of different possibilities that are available online? So those are my initial questions.
You have about 20 minutes for the panel discussing, and then we'll break it up for open up to Q&A plus way in the audience. So please, who wants to speak? Go on.
Wow, Ashley, so many good
I
questions.
was going to say, kind of hard to know where to start with this.
Sure. I'm going to go with question number 2 right now. Can I remind you all of question number 2? So Ashley was really asking here about this, this piece of interest to our group about engaging with diverse perspectives and some of the findings from our work that you tend to withdraw from disagreements as their #1 strategy, even though we know they have a variety of perhaps innovative strategies for engaging online. So the question, I think, is, how can we help our peer youth so that they don't back away and go quiet? And I think that, this is something that an action group that has spun off of Youth and Participatory Politics called Educating for Participatory Politics is very interested in. So, given some of the things that we found in our research, how might civic education be in action? So there are a variety of efforts underway. Our group has worked with Facing History and Ourselves and drawn on some of their core curriculum on Holocaust and human behavior and civil rights issues to create a variety of educational activities where youth reflect on both historical cases of injustice and civil rights and human rights abuses, as well as contemporary cases, historical cases in light of our new age. So, how might Nazi Germany have gone differently if Hitler had come to power in the internet age? What might that have looked like? To really engage with the complexity there, but also looking at and reflecting on contemporary cases where young people are using digital means to address civic issues. And as part of that, really reflecting on different perspectives on social justice issues. So that's one example of something we've done. In Oakland, California, a project called Educating for Democracy in the Digital Age, folks there have worked with the Youth Voices Project and created environments where young people can engage in safe spaces to trade perspectives on political issues. And that sort of using a kind of closed space, maybe it can be seen as training wheels for going public and going into to your own networks. But I think those opportunities to really reflect and then practice using the skills of dialogue and to emphasize authentic listening to one another's perspectives, mindful commenting, which is a thread that we worked on in our Out of Each Learn project. I think that those kinds of civic education experiences can help prepare you. It is a different matter to go public and to engage with disagreements in a public space or in a space where your interests collide with your friendship networks. But I think that educators are poised to provide opportunities for youth to get started in some of those safe spaces, and I think that project is a good example of that.
So I'm going to try the first question and the penultimate question, and unless your notes are as careful as ours were, I will remind you that the first question has to do with impact, and the penultimate question has to do with who gets to participate in these spaces. So I'm making the case that we have to start considering a much wider range of civic participation than just participating in getting people elected or passing laws. And so what this means is taking seriously Jack's video and essentially saying, this is a civic act, whether or not it's a political act, and how do we think about measuring the impact of this? So this is an enormous challenge for the social change community right now. So when I am not teaching and researching, my other job is working for Open Society Foundation, where I'm a board member and I actually spend a lot of time trying to figure out, are we spending our money well? And that means asking all these questions about, did we have an impact of what we're doing? And I ended up writing an article for the Stanford Social Innovation Review, along with my colleague Anu Shifrin, who also is both a teacher and a board member for OSF, about this question of sort of how we evaluate the space. So the first thing is that when you're using law as a lever for change, you have these great binary things you can do. You can say, did we elect the right person? Yes, she's in office. Yes, he was defeated. Great, we won, impact. Or we passed this piece of legislation, or we got these points of it, we won this much, or we won this partially. Once you start moving into change through code, through markets, particularly through norms, it's way more complicated and way more subtle. So has Elon Musk won? Yeah, maybe. Will he win if he sells 250,000 cars, 500,000 cars? How much CO2 do you have to pull out of the environment? What lets you sort of declare victory within that? What we end up suggesting in this article is a framework for thinking about norms-based change, and particularly change through media, which basically says, look, when you're a funder and you're trying to support a media-based campaign, so let's say Jack comes to us and says, we're going to do a campaign about coming out as transgender. How would we evaluate that campaign? Well, the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at reach. Who paid attention to it? Did anyone look at it? But those metrics are really deceptive. This happens to be a very funny video. People might just enjoy looking at it. Do we know whether it actually has any influence or any impact? At the end of the day, we have impact. What came out of it? And the trick is there is no single metric for impact, right? In this case, we might take a metric for impact to be, were you swayed on whether transgender people should have rights? Or it might be, were you swayed on donating to a community organization that supports transgender youth? Or it might be, did you change your opinion on North Carolina's transgender bathroom bill? So there's no consistent impact piece of it. What there might be is a consistent influence piece of it. And influence basically says, how does a video like this shape that debate? Are there ideas or frames that Jack brings into this video that shape the debate around transgender? Does it bring transgender issues to the table in a way that they hadn't been there before? And does it change the shape of that debate? The main quant work I do is around a system called Media Cloud that I've been developing for about 9 years over with colleagues over at Harvard's Berkman Center. Media Cloud basically reads 200,000 media sources every day. And the reason we do this is so we can go in there and essentially say, when did we start talking about transgender issues? And we can kind of look over media over the last 5 years and go, wow, we started talking about this a whole lot more around the time that Bruce Jenner became Caitlyn Jenner. And that turns out to be enormously influential as sort of putting this on the table. And because we're looking at this from a lot of different places, we can say, when we look at issues of transgender, what are the different ways that gets framed? And this work that we're doing is supported mostly by the public health field. Most of my support for that money is coming from Gates, from Robert Wood Johnson, from Ford, because they understand that the way that an issue is framed, for Gates it's women's rights in the developing world, for Robert Wood Johnson it's health and wellness, that's basically a battle for social change. Is transgender issues a civil rights issue, a medical issue, a sexual issue? From my political point of view, we're winning when it's a rights issue. We're winning when it's an equality and freedom issue. We're probably doing badly when it's a health issue or a sexuality issue. So we can keep score by sort of watching that way. So these are some of the ways that you start thinking about impact when you're operating in very different places. Now this question of who has access to the sphere, now great, you're basically bringing up 20 years of arguments, and so I'm going to gloss over some piece of it and deal with what I think is the interesting piece of it. Yes, there's always issues of who has access and doesn't have access to the space. For anyone who hasn't read Esther Hargitay on multiple levels of digital literacy, go read Esther. She's brilliant. Not everybody is a digital native. There probably aren't digital natives. Everyone has different skills and abilities to work with this. What I want to put out is on that framework that I suggested to you guys, my inverted Lessig framework, it's really a problematic shift. And here's why. Those three methods of working outside of the law-based method of working all have profoundly serious equity issues, okay? Everybody has an equal right to go out and make change through computer code. But my students over at the Media Lab at MIT are probably going to kick the butts of your students anywhere else because they're in a better position to assert that form of political power. It may be equal, it's not equitable. And there's no equitable distribution of power around making change through code. Same thing for markets. Elon Musk has a lot more money than I do. If he wants to start a factory to make solar-powered cars, he's in a much better position to do that than I am. And so having that money to start with gives you more power within the markets. Norms-based activity has the same problem. It helps to be Beyonce. It helps to be someone who already has fame and an audience. Helps to be Jack and have this platform that, as he admits, he's found his way to over time. These are not equitable tools of change in the same way that we have worked for generations and now have abandoned all of a sudden in one extremely stupid Supreme Court decision to have an equitable approach to change through law. We have the whole structure of the Voters' Rights Act trying to figure out how to deal with issues of voting equity, which we have now decided aren't important anymore because racism's over, yay! But we now need to think about how would we deal with equity within these other forms of change. I'm done, sorry.
I'm supposed to go next. Aha, what do I, okay, next round. We're reversing it. So I'm gonna kind of just stop, I'm just gonna go. So the way we've been thinking about impact is thinking about the individual or collective trajectories of communities. So this is what you're talking about, is measuring the success of a campaign, or measuring whether you affected that desired change. The other question is what has happened to Jack through being involved? Where has he arrived at? What skills has he picked up? So backing up from that, I feel like what we're starting to do more and more as we try and work in classrooms and with teachers is really identify what are the skills that young people need, and they look really different. If we expand the definition of politics to civics, or whatever, participatory politics, whatever you want to call it, we're looking at a very different skill set than when we were talking about letters to your senator, or going out to vote, or getting people to sign up to vote. Or maybe so it's about those skills, maybe still included, and being able to code, being able to whatnot. So the other piece of what we're kind of starting to look at is, do we need to think about a skill set around analyzing what's the best way forward? So if I'm a young person, I want to affect change in a certain way, how do I even start to think about it in this expanded context of what's it? Like, do I need skills to even just think about, well, do I want to, is it a norms thing? Is it a market thing? Like, what skills do I need, right, to do that? And then what is failure going to look like, and how do I prepare for it? That's what we've seen again and again. Young people make videos and then have 5 views. Or they make a video and have 100 million views, both of which are just as damaging. Yes. Right? So how do you think about that? So safe spaces is one way forward. The other way is to really just start to think about what does it look like when you end up with a failure situation. So defining what success is and then preparing for failure, and understanding what those skills that you're going to need are. And in fact, that is, to me, what the education piece should look like. Is very different than what it was up to.
So, anyone else want to say anything else in the panel before we open it up?
I just want to know if this was the time that we got to start learning volume dance.
Yeah, is it? Is that 6:25, I guess?
Okay.
Wait, you get to find out, is it all in the head?
Right.
What's the answer? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, and more.
Yes,
Of course.
I would like to make one comment, and that is that in all this, I take a kind of historical view. Of course, the media stuff is very new and very exciting. And a lot of what you're saying is future-oriented. But you look at the history of social movements, a lot of it really actually is about mold changing. I mean, the law is there. The law may be a precipitating factor. Sometimes the law precedes the social change. I mean, in Britain, for example, the laws on both abortion and homosexuality, which were passed in 1957, long predated any kind of norms naturally. In other situations, the laws come afterwards, after a great deal of campaigning. But I think if you look at the social change overall, it really is only when norms change you would actually say the social change has happened. And secondly, I think you're also talking about what really is single issue politics rather than party politics. I mean, people are getting involved in single issues. We know that young people are much more motivated by single issues, particularly those which are morally charged, than they do by anything to do with partisanship. So, having made that small contribution over to the audience, if you're going to speak, please use the microphone because we are recording it, and it won't get recorded if you don't have a microphone. So, who'd like to start?
And it's always lovely if you introduce yourself because
Yes,
many
please
of us
do
don't
say
know
who you are.
Great, my name is Allie. Thank you all for being here. This is such a rich conversation. And actually, the two final comments sort of touched a bit on my question, which is about the role of public education in this sphere. So I have to admit, I get very excited about the idea of the sort of insurrectionist and norm change. And then I come back to a place of thinking about digital inequality. So you touched on the question of equity. And thinking, theoretically, certainly there's challenges around equity in public education, but theoretically more youth have access to public education than perhaps digital tools. And so I guess that's my question, and you ended that nicely as well, thank you. But what is the role then of particularly public education with regards to this new space?
I was looking at you.
First, I mean, I think public education has a big role to play, but I think that there are significant challenges. And by public education, do you mean public schools?
I guess the idea that all students have access to education, and then maybe that ends up being a charter, but that idea that education is
Yeah, and I think that needs to be the primary vehicle for supporting youth to engage new skills and literacies as we've been talking about. But there are significant challenges, and some of the things have come up in a general sense. But in some of the work that we've tried to do in the Educating for Participatory Politics network, and there are rich problems around technology access, around the digital comfort and literacy of educators, which, arguably over time will change as the teaching force ages. But we won't necessarily deal with the problem of the lack of technology access. The other issue that I just got stuck on and went out of my head was even if you deal with the digital literacy issue, there can be this perception that doing anything online is a waste of time. And that's something that some educators who we've interfaced with in the EPP or Educating for Participatory Politics work have indicated that, why bother doing, they sort of buy into the myth of slacktivism in ways that really sort of undo our interest in getting them to take up some of this work. And I know that St. Peter's group, when they've engaged with certain educators around some of their workshops, have seen some of this attitude. We've seen it with some educators as well. So there are significant issues.
Would you also make a comment?
Yeah, so I guess one thing I will say is that we've actually been, funnily enough, more successful and we work with educators who are not maybe formally civics teachers. I don't even know if that exists here in Massachusetts and California. I don't think that's on its ebb. But so we've actually worked really well with music teachers or with teachers in the sciences who found ways to build in civic conventions to their work. And that's actually been really helpful to us. That is the answer to your digital divide question, or the digital question, where we actually don't enter it that way. We don't talk about new media. We talk about rethinking civics. And so the new media becomes part of it and is one of the pieces, right? So it shouldn't stop you if you don't have access. That doesn't mean you shouldn't fight for access, but it also shouldn't stop you if you don't have access. And the last part of that is that I just want to say we've met amazing educators, and we do this brainstorming with them. Some of you here coming tomorrow morning, this is a little plug for the workshop, where we ask them to envision the future. And one of the first things they do is not do away with education, not do away with educators, but they do away with the institution of the school. Like that's one of the first things that just like it just consistently flies out the window. And these are teachers who teach in schools, right? So they are saying that there are actual, real structural issues to doing what they want to do inside of the institutions today. Okay.
Jonathan, you have another?
I'll give you a horrifically cynical answer, which is the little bit of experience I've had talking with civics teachers about this idea of teaching insurrectionist civics in one fashion or another, is that it's probably the worst possible way to bring it into a school. And the reason for this is that civics in many ways tends to focus on historical case study, not just because those historical case studies are very rich, but because they're safe. Which is to say that if we talk about the foundation of the American experiment, or if we even talk about how we might have reacted to the Holocaust when we were in Germany, we are in no danger of our students standing up and actually making change in the world. And if our students did actually try to figure out how to go out and make change in the world, we would suddenly be subject to all of these questions about, are we indoctrinating students? Have we turned the public schools into a political place? And of course, we all know that if you actually want students to learn this stuff, you have to let them feel affected, which means they actually have to do something. So teaching civics within the context of the public school is incredibly complicated and incredibly fraught. My instinct is to sort of say maybe this is not the best place to have that impact. Maybe there's other ways we do it, and I think Sangeeta's point about bringing it in through other aspects of the curriculum is spot on. But I would go as far as to say that we teach civics precisely because we know the civics that we're teaching won't do anything.
So I just think my question is mainly a provocation. All right. It starts with the assumption that most kids in the world do not care a damn about civics and won't care throughout their lives. That we're really talking about a very small percentage who actually care. That's the provocation. But I want to point out that today Donald Trump said, go into any bathroom you feel comfortable going into if you're transgender. With Jack, and my provocation, which I don't necessarily really believe, it strikes me, it reminds me actually of Alison Bechdel's book, Funeral Home or Fun Home. For those of you who don't know it, it's a graphic novel about a young woman who, to essentialize this, is trying to confront her own sexual identity while dealing with trying to understand her father's own homosexual identity. Now, her father in this memoir actually kills himself. He commits suicide, all right? And that was back in the 1980s, okay? So let's take that story and her father's suicide and fast forward to Jack, right? So Jack does not commit suicide, right? Instead, Jack, my presumption, does not have to deal with his secret anymore and has a way to go from being secret to being public, okay? But what he really does is erases the line between what used to be very private and what is now public, in my interpretation, which could be wrong, okay? So I see Jack as being able to deal with a secret by becoming public in a field that used to be private. What good is civic these days if you erase the public and the private?
Provocative? Who'd like to take that one?
sorry, I just trying to grapple with, so you're saying that there's nothing, that,
Civic is a useless term these days. If you don't have a public sphere distinct from a private sphere, who needs it?
So,
You go for it.
yeah, I'm not sure I want to touch it. I disagree with your first assumption, and I think I disagree with your last assumption. So let me now try to triangulate a way into this. You started with young people are uninterested in civics, and what I would say is perhaps that's true using an extremely narrow view of civics. You're positing a public and a private sphere that are separate from one another, which is a distinction that I think sort of fell out of favor for a
I
lot of
wasn't
people.
positive. I was saying it's erased. There is no longer a distinction between the public and the private. I'm not saying I'm positive.
Well, and then you're arguing that civics can't happen because of the non-existence of the public sphere or because of the erasure of the line between the two.
I just don't see the use of the term.
I don't much like the term either. Let's find another term for it. I think what I would end up saying is what Jack does is deeply political, deeply civic. It's also deeply personal. And I would say that these actions, which are both personal and political, this is really something we get in the rise of second wave feminism, redefines what the political or the civic sphere is. I find civic helpful as a term because I think political is a less helpful term than it used to be. Political tends to be applied not only to the realm of party politics, but really to the professionalism of the political world, right? So when a lot of the youth that I'm talking about say that they're not political, what they mean is that they haven't joined the Young Republicans or the Young Democrats, they're not planning on getting a Capitol Hill internship, they're not planning a career in that space. And what I would say is that the people who do plan a career in that space are a very, very small group of people. And you're right, young people for the most part don't give a damn about that and look at those people who wear bow ties when they're 16 and go, what the hell is wrong with you, dude? Whereas I think there's a very large group of people who are interested, whether it's in issues of transgender, or in sexuality, or intersex, or immigration, or dreamer status, or so on and so forth, who do things that I would say are deeply civic, but tend to be profoundly personal. So when someone stands up holding a sign saying, screw weed, legalize my mother, like that's a deeply personal and deeply civic activity around immigration. And so I'm with you. The line is blurred. I think the line is blurred extremely helpfully. And I think in that line blurring helpfully, we have to reconstruct the category of what it means to be civic. And I think it's a very helpful category and that allows us to talk about that public yet private space in a way that's outside of the somewhat moribund realm of two-party politics. How's that?
so I'm just going to kind of think about the private versus public piece a little bit, because I actually feel that it's not that it's gone out the window at all. In fact, what I feel,
What is the
Jack,
what's the
the private public, like everything's public, the private.
Okay.
I disagree with that, because I feel like what Jack's actually doing is very much aware of leveraging something that could be private to achieve a shift in the public domain, right? So he's very much performing coming out, right? He's not just coming out to his friends. It's very different. He's thinking about an audience. He's coming out in a way that is aimed to affect change. And I'm thinking also about the dreamers who we saw who came out as undocumented and the ways in which they did that. So sometimes they did that in rooms, sometimes they did that on radio, sometimes they did that on video. And it was actually very much a rethinking of what the public versus private means and how it can be leveraged to give them maximum input on a shift that's profoundly personal that they're feeling, but then move something in the public domain as well.
Can I ask?
Put it on the microphone, yes.
Want me to
Quickly.
Yeah, I just remember I'm trying to provoke, I'm not. But, look, a lot of people rhetorically say, if I can change one person's life by coming out like this, it's made a difference, it's worth it. Let me be a cynic. It's easy to say. What if Jack goes back and never does another thing civically, publicly, except identify for himself that he now feels more comfortable? Is that civic? Is it what is it?
Yes.
Sure, it's
That's what
absolutely. So let's look at normalization of equal marriage in the United States, right? So this is an example that a lot of people toss up. When you get from legalizing racial intermarriage to a point where 50% of Americans agree that racial intermarriage is a good thing to do, is like a 35-year curve. We see a massive change from 90-10 against equal marriage to 60-40 over the course of about 10 years. The main reason speculated for this is that most white people don't have black people in their families, but everybody's got a gay person in their family. And that normalization of acceptance of equal marriage has everything to do with exposure. So, transsexuality is a lot less visible than homosexuality at this moment in time. Jack is an inspiring figure for a large number of people. This is a profoundly civic act. Jack never makes another video? Nah. He's done his part. I'm okay with that.
I just want to say one thing. I think the difference between personal and political, if you stay there dichotomous and you're then talking about removing the boundary between, that's missing the point, surely. The point is showing the complete intersection and dialectical relationship between personal and political, rather than saying it's either or it's not, it's both. Mira had a hand up.
Thanks, Frank. Mira, I'm on the faculty here. I want to first point out that, this is actually way into my question, that one of the most interesting political acts of personal sharing that I saw this year was the more than 100 women who ended up working together on an amicus brief to the Supreme Court, sharing their abortion stories. And most of them going public about the fact that they had an abortion for the first time, and discussing the ways in which, had they had a child at the time that they were pregnant and chose to have the abortion instead, would have derailed sort of who they became eventually. And I think and so one of the reasons I bring that up, because essentially the story of, it's Jack's story, right, as a collective, and through law, is that I'm curious about your inverted blessing paradigm of actually keeping these things so distinct. And you talk about the ways in which norms affect laws and laws affect norms and so forth, right? But it seems like a bizarre division to be postulating. And my sense is that when you are talking about this civic work, right, that I think the point is the blurring. Right? And I think about, say, that although we are amazed at how quickly, say, the legality of same-sex marriage has come about, if we actually think back not just to the Stonewall riots, but then, say, to the radical activism of ACT UP, right, and the kind of violent outing of people, right, in the 1980s, that was part of the work that, has a legal component. If we think back to, say, the civil rights movement in the middle of the 20th century, you had simultaneous, right, legal work, social work, norming work, marketing work, boycotts, right? I guess
I'm about to concede every point.
Okay, all right. So then I won't ask a question about that. My question is, I'm curious when you talk about the case studies and many of the examples you've given, not only as Helen pointed out, are they single issue, they also seem to be sort of at least perspectives. We have perspectives on the left, or say with the libertarian kids, right, we might have perspectives on the right. There seems to be some uniformity of perspective. There may be disagreement about what we should do, right? If we're in favor of immigration reform, is it better to do X, Y, and Z? But I'm curious, do you have any case studies, or have any of you done work with youth who are working across very substantial political and ideological divides on issues.
I would actually, I mean, just to kind of calibrate that, we actually had across none of our case studies broke down that way in terms of who the participants in those groups were, though you may think so. So,
Okay.
for example, the libertarians, we had libertarians who participated in Occupy and libertarians who opposed Occupy. So we had that. And so on American Muslim issues, we also had a real split around whether they were Democrats or Republicans. I mean, that we had a mix of everywhere. The Harry Potter Alliance is not a single issue organization. It
I
actually
think
takes
of
on
them as
different.
being very much on the left, though, aren't they, or are they not? I mean, this is something.
This is
I've
this is actually, quite honestly, that is a tension within the organization itself, and they've kind of gone back and forth. I think since we started researching them and working with them, they have landed more on the left, but I remember when they were taking on, in fact, marriage equality as an issue for the first time, they alienated some of their constituents because they were like, no, I love Harry Potter. I don't agree with this. I'm all for fair trade chocolate, but this is not where I want to follow you. So maybe the Dreamers would be a clearer single issue or case study, but the other ones actually didn't break down that way.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and in our interviews, we spoke with youth who were civic dialoguers about Israel-Palestine and definitely got into the fray with others. Actually, one of our most confident dialoguers who was one of the few who would not withdraw. Scooby was his pseudonym, would not withdraw from conversations, was really mobilized around that issue and had a variety of dialogical rules that he would use to engage with people and learned over time what to respond to and in what way and what not to respond to. It's fascinating.
And to defend myself, right, I'm trying to take an hour and a half long talk and give a 10-minute version of it. In the 20-minute version, we would talk about the fact that the levers are almost never used independently of one another. The reason it's a helpful way to think about things is it's a way of broadening the palette of what someone knows how to do, but I agree with you, they're almost inherently complementary.
Alan has a question. And then
Hope you don't mind if I sit in
there
front.
you are.
Alana Garana, I'm a doctoral student in public health, studying power dynamics in community-based disability research. I wanted to step back a bit before we label these, I'm going to call them cyber civics, if that's okay. But before we label them as their own breed, I was just wondering where were they before the internet, and because I kind of find it interesting that, in the beginning we discussed seeking like a safe space on the internet for civics, but that almost sounds ironic because, doesn't empowerment, don't you need conflict for empowerment? And I just wondered if a safe space on the internet for civics is too idealistic, just for provocation, just to.
Right.
So I'm going to resist cyber civics
Yes,
because I don't think anyone else studies that, and I think it's a trap to concede that to you. So I'm an internet theorist. That's what I do, and I discovered that I actually couldn't start working on this book that I'm working on around mistrust if I started from the starting place that you're going from. It's the wrong starting place. What is interesting is not that a lot of this activity happens online. What's interesting to me is that this activity tends not to fit within existing models of civics. And so for me, the starting point is not that it happens online, it's that it starts from a position of intense mistrust of institutions. That may or may not be where Carrie's work or Sangeeta's work starts from, but it's a mistake to characterize it as being inherent to the medium. What I would say is closer to the truth is that it's very much a civics about producing media and putting it out in the world. And that one of the things that my lab is organized around, my lab, Center for Civic Media, is organized around this idea that making media is a way of attempting to make change. But people have been making media as a way of making change since the 9th century in China. with petitions to the emperor. So this goes back rather far. So I reject your question.
I guess for us, so I'm speaking now for the Henry Jenkins approach, I guess. But for us, the approach would be opportunities to participate and what participation means and how that shifts in terms of ability to organize and affect community. So it would be, again, that moment of digital media entering the space would be a moment, but it would be maybe similar to the radio and or to the telephone and or to television. I mean, television probably wouldn't be a participatory example, but you could think about those different moments, or theater, So I actually don't. I wonder though if our colleague at the YPP Network has a framework where she differentiates between the role that digital media has played for specific organizations. Jen Earl is her name, and she looks at organizations for whom digital media has really helped them achieve a different scale. So in fact, they're still doing the same thing, but they're doing it online, maybe reaching more people. And then she looks at models in which digital media has really enabled organizations or networks to work in ways that would not have been possible without the digital media in place. So that might be a helpful way to answer your question, but that's not how we approach.
And one last, sorry,
No, I was just going to say that, just going back to the point about safe spaces, I think that they can be really important, tools for young people to practice, the kinds of dialogue strategies I was talking about before, especially really mindful dialogue strategies and, practice putting out a perspective, especially given some of those risks and areas of concern the young activist told us about. Putting out a perspective, sticking your neck out with a group of individuals in a more closed, private space on the internet and see what happens. Really playing off them and playing things out and not just automatically withdrawing because of the concerns about being in the public. Ultimately, we want young people to go public, but I am a big fan of working in these spaces as a stepping stone.
One last question for this lady here.
Hi, my name's Holly, and I'm a student here, but for the last 3 years I've actually worked on a curriculum trying to promote discussion and debate in schools to promote civics. And within this, the topics, the more controversial, the more the kids engage, but there was also this big pushback that the teachers, didn't want to go there. Like for instance, if I took Jack and put this up in my classroom right now, I'm going to have a parent complaint. And so how do you merge, if we want to call it cyber civics, new civics, expanded civics, where it can reinforce, inform, engage our students, where they're learning how to actually go out there and do what we could call old civics, vote, like promote these other things. Under the guise that somebody within the school system is always going to complain and can completely stop what's happening.
Quick responses?
I'm not planning on doing it in the schools. I'm planning on doing it online. And I'm planning on doing it around issues that people are gravitating towards. And I'm planning on building curricula that people find their way to while they're learning about the issues that they care about and want to engage with. I'd be terrified to try to do it within the school system.
I guess one way would be, but one other way would be, well, you don't come in with a Jack video. You allow the students you encourage the students to bring in what it is, right? That's going to be discussed, and you let it come from them. So you're not introducing a topic. That doesn't mean they won't get shut down, but at least it will be a topic that has surfaced from the class itself and not from the educator.
Yeah, I think this is super challenging, but I guess my thoughts go to school culture and leadership, making clear that these are the kinds of conversations we need to be having in classrooms, and to avoid them is not preparing their children for being effective participants in democracy and the wider world.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for a very exciting discussion. It has been recorded, so if your friends couldn't come, they could watch it. I'd like to say also that tomorrow morning Sangeeta is running a workshop on the Imagine the Future, and you are in fact welcome to come to that. It's in Longfellow 228, and it runs from 9 till 12. It's a whole 3 hours. We do serve you with breakfast, but if you want to come.
And coffee, right? And it's super fun.
It's super fun.
Carrie's experience.
But again, I really want to thank our panelists because it's been extremely stimulating and provocative, and in some ways both very exciting and optimistic, but also in some ways recognizing the real problems we're encountering in trying to make these things happening. So thank you so much.